So we're going to give everyone just a minute or so to get into the room. We see folks kind of coming in, but we are very excited for a great conversation on how to be a great research partner, and so happy to have all of you here. So we'll give it about another 60 seconds, and then we'll get kicked off with housekeeping and opening remarks. But thanks everyone so much for coming back after lunch. We hope you had a great time visiting the posters, checking out the rest of the event, and can't wait for the next part coming up.
That's great. I think we are also all learning how to do virtual events, which is a fascinating thing.
It's another, I was curious to see how this worked out. It's an interesting platform visually, so yeah.
Yeah, we are, we're all new to this, and we appreciate everyone having some patience and flexibility as we all navigate this, but we are having a great day so far. I think the conversations have been good. So, one checkbox done, and we're looking forward to what's next.
Yep, well, I've appreciated the communication as well. I think it's made it easier. I hope Adam and Onno would say the same thing, but it's made it easier for us as speakers to know what to expect and when, and that's been helpful too, as a million loose ends for you.
We do our best, right? Yeah. So I think we have a number of folks in the room. Look like we have about 40 folks here so far, and I'm sure we'll have another couple of folks just coming in. But so just to kind of kick things off, I wanted to welcome you all to our session on how to be a great research partner. Before we get everything kicked off, just wanted to share a few quick housekeeping notes. First, all attendees are currently muted by the moderator to reduce any interruptions. We encourage you to use the chat function in the Zoom window for any questions that you may have throughout the session. And the moderator team, myself and Pam, will make sure to present them to the speakers. Just so everyone knows, what we're going to do here is allow everyone to give a few quick presentations and then move into the Q&A portion, where we will kind of take all of those questions together. Please direct any questions via the chat box, as I said, and that button is located at the bottom of your screen. If there are questions that we're not able to address by the speakers because they don't have an answer, or we run short on time, we are more than happy to do our best follow-up after the program, and we'll be taking a note of which questions we are able to get to and which ones we are not. If you have any technical difficulties with it right now or in the program as a whole, please exit the auditorium and return to the lobby to click on the help desk. Unless you're a speaker, please stay with us if you're a speaker. If you are having any attendee difficulties, though, please do visit the tech team in the lobby, as they will be more than happy to assist you with that. Finally, we encourage you all to participate as active listeners. Take advantage of this opportunity to learn from experts and leaders and ask questions of them. This is truly your time to learn, get your questions answered, and we certainly want to make sure that this is a valuable experience for you. And so, without any further ado, I am so pleased to introduce you to our three speakers for this upcoming session: Onno Faber of RDMD, Adam Sherman of IFOPA, and Nan Doyle with Takeda Pharmaceutical. They're each going to share a little bit more about their specific backgrounds and where they're coming into this conversation from. But for now, I would love to turn it right over to Onno, who's going to share some slides with us and kick the conversation off. And thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Anne, for the introduction. I see like 50 attendees. That's cool. I'm going to quickly share some slides. Can you guys see it?
We can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to keep this short. I think all three of us are just going to give some short thoughts here, and then we kick off the discussion. How to be a great research partner? I think this is a great question, and I have my own thoughts and interpretation on this I'm going to share. A little bit about me, this is as a background. I'm an entrepreneur since I was 16. So I started my first company in high school, mostly around technology. And about 5 years ago, I got diagnosed with a rare condition called NF2. It's a tumor predisposition syndrome. I developed tumors in my central nervous system, and they can knock out the senses such as hearing or eyesight or cause paralysis. Since I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco, I have access to technology. I'm in technology, so I decided to sequence the tumor that was surgically removed from my brain and organize a hackathon, which is a collaborative event. We had about 300 participants. Google was involved. And I shared my genetic data, and people were just trying to find answers in the data. Not just for me, of course, but for like the broader purpose of exploration. I'm also in a group called RAINS, which is a multidisciplinary group that exists in the neurofibromatosis world to find endpoints together with like patients, researchers, and clinicians, regulators. And I think that is pretty cool, a pretty cool initiative as well. Because of the like multidisciplinary nature of it. A few years ago, I started RDMD, which is a medical data science platform, and we try to create a centralized way to get clinical data sets that can be used for natural history. Gonna share a few more thoughts around that later. I also work with UCLA with a research lab on machine learning to improve preclinical models, animal models. And I'm currently working on tech-enabled drug discovery with another multidisciplinary team. When I think about how to be a great research partner, I have to think about this topic, collaboration versus competition. And yeah, this kind of concept kept me busy since I entered this life science space and the rare disease space. And I'm sure everyone has their own thoughts about this, but I want to, bring this topic up. So I think under the right circumstances, competition can make things better for everyone. This is how we shaped our society and our economy, of course. Yeah, the idea of competition is the best solution wins and comes up. But I think it's predicated on each of the competitors having enough resources to generate a viable solution. Right? If nobody has enough resources to generate a viable solution to compete, we all end up with nothing. And that's a negative or pessimistic way to think about it. That's the fear as well that I quite often have. And so on a system level, I think we have to be very mindful about what things we want to compete against each other and where we don't want to compete. And I'm just throwing it out there. I still see a lot of competition where I think collaboration would be the better option in the rare disease space. So when is collaboration a winning strategy? I want to illustrate this with an example. I grew up in the Netherlands, and we are fighting the ocean for quite a while. Like 60% of our country is under the sea level. And we do that by creating water barriers around our houses. So here on top, you see like what it means if you want to protect your house, right? So the house is represented by this dot. And I need, like, let's say 4 barriers to protect my house from the ocean. But the 4 barriers might be like so costly that it's not really worth the risk of it flooding. So maybe this doesn't happen, right? But if I work together with other people, and let's say we want to protect our 4 houses together, I only need 8 water barriers for 4 houses. It's very simple math, but that means 2 barriers per house. And maybe it only becomes viable when we actually get to, for example, 1 water barrier per house if we work with 16 houses together. So I explain this because I want us to illustrate that it is feasible. We do have enough resources to protect ourselves from the ocean, but we may have to bundle our resources together to reach that necessary escape velocity for something to happen. And I feel this is very similar, can be very similar in the rare disease space. But I think if we successfully do this, and we are smart about it, we can really make rare disease a great growth industry where people want to invest in as well. Some more thoughts about like that part, like scaling rare disease. So rare disease actually provide really good way to start on something very locally, but then think about building scalable systems like tools and skill sets that are more widely applicable. So RDMD is also an example of that. I started building this for NF2, but of course thinking about how we could scale it up and add more diseases and make a general solution for everyone. And under those circumstances, it became a viable thing to invest in. But if it would only be for NF2, the cost would be way too high to build this platform. The same is true for other things like AAV, for example, or certain therapies that if you develop them once successfully for one disease, you might be able to build a platform and a scalable solution for many. Another point that I think we have a lot of opportunity is in multidisciplinary teams. Like I see that coming from a technology background, entering the life science space. Like what if you bring computer engineers, design thinking to the pharma and life science industry? I think we have lots of opportunities there still, especially in rare disease where we need that extra bit of creativity. But those things could lead to good changes in the industry for everyone. So to close off, I want to share this illustration with you guys. I call the Avengers model. So Avengers is a movie, as everyone knows, where you have many people with superpowers, but they form a team and they work against a common goal. So it's not a single hero story; it's a multi-hero story. So I'm imagining what if we can find ways to work on drug development in these rare diseases with the same incentive. What if we can bundle like different ideas and have everybody do their part and let these ideas go through a pipeline and let the best idea win, like to create a model where it is about ultimately the best idea and everybody winning. And intentionally do that and build multidisciplinary teams from the start, from the get-go. Hopefully in a way that we can all benefit, rethinking the systems and the models around it. I think I'm going to leave it there and pass the microphone to the next speaker, and I hope for a good discussion.
Thanks so much, Onno. And so I'm very pleased to now turn it over to Adam for our next installment, passing the torch microphone of sorts.
So, sorry, mute. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Sherman. I'm the research director for the International FOP Association. I just want to thank Anne and the meeting organizers for inviting me to speak. And it's a real pleasure to be on the same panel as Onno and Nan. Disclosures. So just briefly about my background. So I come to the IFOPA probably through a path less traveled. Most of my time has been spent in biotech and more specifically within developing treatments for rare disorders. So I think my background gives me a little bit of a unique perspective in terms of some of the challenges of working in drug development, as well as some of the needs of our research partners. Briefly, Fibrodysplasia, Ossificans, Progressiva is an ultra-rare condition that affects approximately 1 in 1 to 1 in 2 million individuals, although we're conducting a prevalence study to refine that number. It results from a single point mutation in the BMP receptor that results in tendons, ligaments, and muscle turning into bone. And you can see this heterotopic ossification on the right, which restricts joints, mobility, and also leads to premature death for some. Importantly, there are no effective treatments in FOP, although we do have multiple drugs in clinical trials. So wanted to just start off my talk with a very brief analogy. If you were going to build a skyscraper, where would you begin? You may want a very ornate spindle on top. Maybe you want an observation deck or even a restaurant on your top floor. But these are obviously not places that you would think about beginning. If you want your skyscraper to last for years, decades, or even centuries, you're going to be thinking about its foundation. You're going to be thinking about these support systems that are drilled hundreds of feet below Earth to provide its stability and sustainability. And in our world, our foundation really starts actually with fundraising. The development of drugs and the development of treatments for rare disorders is a multi-year, multi-decade endeavor, and having sustainability and predictability for your funds allows continuity for your research partners. And from there, you can scale up the types of programs that you're able to offer up your research partners. You're also going to want to think about having a research strategy in place. We all know, working in patient associations, that we're very limited in terms of the resources we have, whether that's time, people, or money. So having a research strategy in place will help you to prioritize where you want to spend these limited resources. And we found that having a research strategy in place will also be a great communication tool for how you communicate to your stakeholders and research partners. We set off to develop our research strategy back in 2017, so this is seen as a multi-year strategy, and we broke it out, as you can see, into 4 basic areas: basic research, drug development, clinical trials, and clinical care. And then what we did is we worked with our research partners and our stakeholders to identify those priorities within each group. And we also identified research gaps. And surprisingly, this took us into unique areas like immunology, bone and muscle regeneration, as well as discovery of novel biomarkers. So the IFOPA, like many of your organizations, do not have labs, nor do we have teams of researchers actually working on research. So how we accomplish those goals is actually an important topic. We do so in really 4 main key ways. First, we establish research partnerships and collaborations. And we look for opportunities where we could bring researchers together and really solve key challenges that are being faced in FOP. We develop research tools and make these available to our researchers to lower the barriers for conducting research and help them de-risk the science before they get too far along their research path. Third, we provide research funding to support everything from basic research, as well as the development of new treatments. And finally, we work with biotech and pharmaceutical partners to support really the experts who know how to develop drugs, conduct clinical trials, and really navigate the regulatory matrices. And I'll just say we're very fortunate in FOP to have great partners that we work with. So the IFOPA has multiple programs in each one of these buckets, and I just wanted to share briefly 3, just to kind of show indicatively how we support our research partners. The first one is a competitive grant program. It's one of my favorite. It's called the Act for FOP Program. And we started this program 5 years ago as a way to support investigators who need funds to develop new treatment modalities for FOP. We receive proposals from investigators all over the world, and we've set up an independent scientific advisory board that reviews these proposals. During the past 5 years, so we've just had this program past 5 years, we've awarded over $950,000 in research commitments. And again, we couldn't have this program if it wasn't for the excellent fundraising that we've had in place over these past 3 decades of being an organization. Over the 5 years, we developed a great portfolio of research for this program, including 18 grants that we're now funding at 14 institutions around the world, and you can see the institutions we work with down here. Half of these grants are looking at novel new ways of treating, new drugs of treating FOP, and as mentioned, we're spending close to $1 million for this portfolio. And here's the drug pipeline for FOP. You can see the drugs going down in the rows and the stage of development in the columns. And I'm only sharing this just to highlight these light blue rows here. These are the compounds that the IFOPA is supporting through the Act for FOP Grant Program. The second program I just want to highlight through a cartoon. If you are a research partner, you have an idea or a drug you want to test in FOP, you can write up a grant proposal, submit it to our Act for FOP Grant Program, which I just described. If it's accepted, you'll receive money and you can conduct your research. If you need mice or a mouse model to test your drug, we also have mice or FOP mouse model that is available for researchers. Or you could just bring your mice in-house and conduct your research separately. But we've heard from our research partners that maybe they just want to establish early proof of concept data before they make commitments of going down one of these two pathways. So we ended up creating a third pathway for our research partners with our preclinical drug testing program. This is really testing the box. So bring your idea or bring your drug and we'll test it for you. We just established this preclinical drug testing program this year. And again, this is just another example of a great partnership that we have with the Mayo Clinic that does all of our testing. And the real goal of this is to lower the threshold for studying and testing research in our disease. And by lowering the threshold, we think we'll generate more treatment ideas, whether it's testing new drugs, testing drugs that are approved in other indications but might have utility in FOP, or a combination of treatments to have additive effect. And by lowering the threshold, we also think we're going to get results faster and accelerate research for our disease. And then the last vignette, if you will, is how we support our partners is a little bit further in clinical development continuum. And this is really about developing endpoints in clinical trials. In FOP, most of the clinical trials are ongoing or measuring bone volume and trying to see how their drug impacts the rate of bone volume, hopefully reducing that rate. But we find in FOP is just a little bit of bone in the wrong place. So for example, in the joint can have a really dramatic clinical impact. So there's not necessarily a clear correlation between bone volume and clinical meaningfulness. And we think this is going to be a challenge in the future, and we think our regulators might be questioning this. So we ended up wanting to bring the patient voice into drug development. And we're starting off this year developing our own patient-reported outcomes instrument that will measure symptoms in patients with FOP. And we're looking to put that instrument into our FOP registry. And importantly, make this instrument available to all research partners and clinical trial sponsors so that they can measure clinical symptoms in their own clinical trials. And finally, we hope to run a natural history study to be able to collect these symptoms in FOP and then make this data set available to future trial sponsors. And I'll just say that we are planning to work with FDA to make sure we're doing this in a way that makes the tool fit for these purposes. So I'll leave it there. I know that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. And sometimes it's challenging to ask your questions. So should you have any questions after this session, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam. That was great. And we are starting to already get some chat questions coming in. So just a reminder to start putting in those questions whenever you're ready, but we will kind of pose them to the panel afterwards as well. And without further ado, passing it over to our final presentation before the Q&A to Nan Doyle. Thank you so much. Dan, you might be on mute if you're trying to talk.
Yeah, I am on mute. I didn't want to hear you. I want you to hear me talking to myself while I put this up on.
No problem at all.
Yep. Let's see. And for some reason, it's not going up. There we go. Okay, that's what we wanted. Okay, how's the audio? Okay.
Audio is great, and it looks like video just caught up too, so perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, thank you. And thanks to Global Genes and Anne and everyone involved in making this event possible. I'm really happy to be with you and Onno and Adam to share some ideas on how to be a great research partner. You know, so much of this is about trust. You know, the pharmaceutical industry has been taking a bad rap over the last several years, some of it deservedly. We're under the spotlight in this era of COVID for reasons that none of us could have imagined. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to share with you how Takeda is addressing how to be a great research partner within Takeda R&D. You know, this is really all about seeing the world through the patient lens. You know, patients are often and can be, and I think should be, very, very open about their needs. We need to make the effort as pharmaceutical companies to listen and make medicines of value that truly are valuable to patients. We can do that in a number of ways. The kind of backstory with the R&D Patient Engagement Office where I sit, and just by way of background, I joined the company almost a year ago after a career that's included several business development, corporate development, philanthropic development roles, primarily in life science and rare diseases. I spent many years at Genzyme, a few at Alnylam, a few with other companies as private clients, but I really got a personal appetite and passion for both rare diseases and genetically derived conditions, so much so that a few years ago I did a master's in genetic counseling, which was the perfect blend of intensive medical genetics and how to talk about it with just about anybody. As you know, this work is never going to progress as fast as we want until more people understand what it's all about. And if I can personally be that conduit, I'm more than happy to do it. But Takeda R&D patient engagement is a fairly new function to the company. Started in late 2018, went at a bit of a pause while Takeda and Shire were merging. You know, Takeda has an enormous number of functions that have patient in their title, whether it's patient advocacy, patient services, patient access, patient recruitment and retention, patient engagement, it goes on and on. So truly a patient-centric company. But the gap that the company identified long before I joined was that in R&D, we could do more and we can do more to understand the patient perspective earlier than the time that something is, say, in late stage clinical trials and getting ready to be marketed. We can understand more about the patient experience. What's it like to live with a particular condition, either as a patient or a care partner, especially if it's a condition that Takeda doesn't know much about. We're not as active in it. We like to bring study teams together with patients to understand the condition, understand aspects of clinical trials that may be either intriguing or troublesome. I'll get into that a little bit later. But we work very closely with the other patient-facing groups within the company on several patient engagement tactics. The advisory board is one that is very familiar to most people, but we will also do activities, for example, sharing back what we've learned in advisory board, helping patients to hopefully feel that they were heard and hear how we're incorporating their perspective into our next steps. And we really want people to leave their assumptions at the door, and that works both ways in R&D patient engagement. Because the real benefit is below the surface, and this is a wonderful metaphor of an iceberg. A couple of examples. We had an advisory board before I joined the company where we were talking with people who had bowel dysfunction as a result of spinal cord injury. And we learned from several that they would almost prefer that the bowel issues be resolved and addressed than to walk again, which was, as you can imagine, a surprise. In another situation with a rare genetic disorder that leads to compromised lung function. And we learned through patients that one of the real concerns that they really didn't express to their healthcare providers and hadn't been seen in the literature was that incontinence is a huge issue. You know, imagine being at the bottom of a flight of stairs with compromised lung function and having to climb that and realizing what effects that exertion can have on your body. So these surprises and aha moments are just full of you know, the richness of R&D patient engagement. As a company, we have tried to build this into the culture in a couple of ways. 2 years ago, we asked every global program team to do a patient involvement activity. Then in fiscal 19, which was just last year, we wanted, you know, every GPT or global program team, or 30, I should say, excuse me, 30% of those GPTs to plan ahead, work with our office to map out their asset strategy and where might those inflection points be where patient perspective could really inform your decision. And then backing up from that, how do we try to obtain that perspective and who's going to do it so that we're not doubling up on each other or leaving gaps that go unfulfilled because some other group thought that we were doing it or vice versa. So those patient engagement plans will be fully embraced and done by all GPTs at the end of this fiscal year. But that's been a great grounding and foundation for the patient engagement activities that follow. Oops. There we go. So some overarching themes that we have learned specific to clinical trials that I hope that you who are part of this session can take back to your organizations, either whether you're in industry or in an organization. Really 3 of them. Set clear expectations. You know, thinking, you know, patients don't want surprises. No one likes surprises. So what will happen during a clinical trial? What's being measured and when and how often and why? What aspects of a clinical trial might be covered either through my insurance or by the trial itself. You know, I'm more likely as a patient to enroll and stay in a clinical trial if I have some idea of what to expect. Secondly, reducing the trial burden. I refer to this as kind of the 14th tube of blood syndrome. It's so tempting if you have patients coming into a clinical study to, well, let's just draw another tube, or let's run another MRI, or let's do one more assessment that will give us more data. But from a patient perspective, is that necessarily the best thing? So that's another clear theme that's come through the R&D patient engagement office activities, and one that in fact we are implementing throughout the company in various ways that we can go into a little bit later. One example of that is recently we had a parent of a child with a rare disease who asked very simply, how can I know what's involved in the study when I bring my kid to the emergency department? He's a boy. He tends to, you know, fall and get into accidents, but I want to be sure that the ED knows what this trial is all about. Perfectly logical question. We hadn't thought of it. Thirdly, we're looking into ways that we can share back data and results from trials with patients and with our patient partners. This is something that Europe is on a trajectory to do anyway. We would like to be ahead of that. It's, you know, involves a lot more complexity in terms of data privacy and study integrity, but it is something that we very much want to do because patients are asking for it. One example where that might be helpful is if, for example, a patient has known drug allergies and needs to start on a new medication to treat her existing condition, can she find out whether she was on the treatment arm or the placebo arm? That makes a difference to her, and we need to be able to give her that information. So our industry colleagues will often ask, why? Why would we do this? You know, aren't we giving people false hope? And we know that most compounds fail. So, you know, by interacting with patients sooner, are we setting each of us up for some expectations that perhaps can't be met? Is this beneficial or harmful? We like to think that the hope is actually what keeps people going in many, many ways, whether it's a patient living with a rare condition or industry coming to work every day. You know, without hope, there isn't much to go on. So by having these interactions, conversations, early engagements with patients in the R&D process, and setting very, very clear expectations, we hope that we can find that balance between hope and you know, and the opposite. As people need it, along with expectations. So I happen to love this slide because it kind of epitomizes what we are trying to do. Things that industry can do is bring the patient perspective in sooner. Those of you who are in this industry, we'd certainly be happy to share, you know, how Takeda is doing this, what we've learned. Patients, you know, same thing. Look for the companies that are listening to you and make your voices heard however you possibly can. It's not always about the ROI. Sometimes it's the right thing to do. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, thank you just to all three of you for really great overviews to get the conversation started. And to kind of kick things off, I'd love to just get started with one of our first questions that came in, which is from an advocate who knows a lot about their disease personally and, you know, feels like an expert in that area, but wants to determine more who they can best partner with, how to determine who might be the most beneficial to partner with. Onno, it sounds like she's already working with you, but, you know, had some interest in understanding how to evaluate which collaborations may be most beneficial for your particular group or disease state area. So I don't know if you want to kick it off, but whoever.
Yeah, I can try. Yeah, it's a good question. Like sometimes it's really hard to see which other conditions have overlap with yours. And it also depends a lot on like the types of solutions that are generated in your condition, because, you know, some directions or solutions might be applicable to this disease, but others might be applicable to that disease. So I see that there are all these kinds of cross relationships between different diseases. Yeah, I think it's already interesting to talk to other organizations and you know, just like learn from each other, and maybe just randomly you stumble up onto something that you both try to do. But another thing I think in terms of you know, collaboration is build these sort of central resources for collaboration within your disease group. So, for example, if two organizations try to build a registry to contact patients, you know, that might not be the most efficient way to do it, right? So why not, like, you know, divide and conquer? You know, you decide like, okay, we are doing this, you're doing this, and we work together, and then we create just better resources with the limited time and attention and financing that you have. So I think a lot of it is also about how to create shared resources within your particular condition of interest. And then when you do that successfully, you know, how can this resource that we generate or the knowledge we have from it benefit other conditions too?
Absolutely. Nan or Adam, did either of you want to chime in on this question? We do also have a couple of others coming as well.
I think Onno covered it well.
Yeah, beautiful.
Same here.
Well, I guess we have just an interim mic drop moment, but so that's great. So for Nan, we have a question specifically for you. When engaging patients, how do you balance those highly involved in advocacy versus your maybe, in quotes, more typical patients? Seems like those within advocacy who are more involved in nonprofits may have a different understanding of drug development and different expectations than a patient who maybe hasn't been involved.
Yep, that is a great question. Great question. But I won't say we struggle with it, but we think about it a lot. And, you know, encountering that on a couple of patient engagement activities that I'm developing right now. Our answer, and I'm open to suggestions too, has been to cast a wide net, because we certainly can work through our patient advocacy colleagues who have relationships with advocacy organizations. We can also work through our medical affairs colleagues who may have relationships with providers who are working in the rare disease space. That said, that tends to the patients who are connected to us that way can be more knowledgeable, more astute, know what questions to ask. So there are other ways to find, whether it's through some social media, through some other recruitment channels, through word of mouth. We want to cast a wide net as possible, because we do want to find not only the very experienced patient advocate, but also the more, there's no such thing as average, but someone who maybe isn't as much in the spotlight. The other thing that we have to think about, though, is how comfortable is this person talking about their condition with a group of people from a pharmaceutical company. You know, they may be very comfortable, but they may feel intimidated, much as we might try to ease that potential intimidation. You know, we're people too, and we do as much as we can to build a relationship before we get into the tough stuff. But that's another thing that we have to think about in terms of which patients are willing to engage.
Great, thank you so much. One other question, mainly directed to Adam here. How is the preclinical testing and drug testing program funded? Sorry, I think there might be a small typo. Is it through disease foundations or government grants? And what are the criteria for accepting that drug into the pipeline? I know that's a question, so.
Yeah, no, it's a great series of questions. So the program is actually funded by fundraising. As we talked about, that's kind of our foundation. So the IFOPA does support this program individually. And what we do is we typically we have an application process that we will establish where researchers will submit their ideas, and twice a year we'll select the best candidates to be tested. So it's not every compound, but we try to make it somewhat competitive because there is a cost to running the program. But I will say it's a great program. I think it's very efficient in terms of running and testing compounds. And the other benefit is you can compare results. So if one lab is running multiple drugs, you can have a relative sense of which drug is working better because you kind of eliminate variability from lab to lab. So hope that addresses the question.
Definitely, I think that's a good start. And so I think this is a broader question for the group. So thank you all for your excellent and diverse presentations. Everyone talks about and believes in collaboration, although it can get tricky with clinical research studies and natural history conducted by academic medical centers as well as in companies. My questioner's experience is that those parties are often reluctant to share the data, even though from a patient advocacy perspective, we have to be able to put together a comprehensive picture of the disease. And a specific hi from Sue to both Nan and Adam as well. So.
Sue, okay.
Yeah.
So, and whoever would like to jump in.
I can jump in. I'm sure everybody has thoughts, but I think it is indeed tricky. Like, it's not easy at all to collaborate, and it usually involves making some compromises as well, which nobody really wants to do. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, I think, but it can still be the best path forward. And you know, in the end, we can call each other out, like, hey, why are we here? You know, what are we trying to do? You know, we're trying to you know, improve people's quality of life, improve people's life. And I think that can, you know, when we call each other out on that, like, we can all find ways to do it.
Absolutely.
And I can maybe just add in on top of Onno's comment that When it comes to natural history data and data that does not involve treatment-related data, I would urge communities to start thinking about this as community data and not sponsored data, especially in ultra-rare diseases where it's difficult to run these studies. And especially once you have treatments ongoing, it's almost impossible to get people kind of excited to participate in a long natural history study. So really the advantage goes to that first company that conducts that natural history study. And if we as a community treat this as the community's data and not the sponsor's data, I think, and put a little bit more pressure, I think, as Onno mentioned, this is really, that broader picture it's in the best interest of the community to share this data. And if we truly want the best treatment for our patients, then that's kind of the approach I think we have to take.
Yeah, and from my perspective, you know, it's a different kind of data, but I mentioned earlier that we are looking very closely and listening very closely at clinical trial burden. And I can imagine, you know, it's not something that we've actually actively talked about, and it's still a little bit too new. I can imagine us publishing a white paper on that, you know, and disseminating that throughout the community so that other people can benefit from the voices that we've heard from. Or what are some things that companies, you know, industry needs to think about. So different kind of data, but we absolutely believe that it needs to go outside of Takeda, you know, when we can.
Yeah, maybe one more thought also around since the question mentions clinical data specifically, and this is something, I mean, I've worked with RDMD, of course. Yeah, one thing that we saw was that usually pharma companies, they need to get this data at some point to get a bit of a sense what this disease is like. And when it's not there, they need to develop this resource themselves because nobody else did it yet. But of course, from a company point of view, if you pay like $1 million or sometimes even more to get the data, to structure it, because it's a huge investment, right, to do this. It's not just something you can do on the side. Are they incentivized to share it with their competing companies? No, they're not. It's not that, you know, they're bad people or something, but there's just no reason for them to share something that they've paid a lot of money for with other parties. I mean, so this is a bit why I thought, you know, it would be a really good idea if we build these data sets, you know, before there is a need in the industry, but also in a more centralized way. So at least you can build it once, and many companies can work with that data, and then everybody benefits because the companies don't have to wait as long to get it. They don't have to do it all themselves, and they can just step into it. And yeah, but somebody, like the problem still is somebody needs to make that initial investment to get it done, and that can be incredibly difficult. So I think, you know, in this case, what we with RDMD try to do is do the investment upfront, work with organizations, have patient accountability. Ultimately, the data is owned by the individual patients. So if they don't like what we do, they won't sign up, right? So we, as an organization, we are accountable to them. But we can also bridge that gap between the patients and the community and the companies. So I don't know. It's not an easy topic because, again, like the company also needs to at some point you know, get the investment back, and there are all kinds of complex things going on, and this will always be the case. But we all need to sort of make it work together, and I think it involves yeah, again, it involves like a willingness to see like, hey, what do these people need, what do we need, and ultimately call each other out on why you know, why we are doing this. But yeah, so I think it is an effort, so I don't want to dismiss that it's not an effort to do so, but I think it's worth it.
Great. And a question directed to Adam, and then just so no one's alarmed, I have to go turn on a moderator for a roundtable, but Pam will be here to finish up the Q&A, and we still have 10 minutes for a couple more questions that we do have, and we have a couple already in. But my last question to Adam would be a question on how long it really takes to build out the type of research infrastructure that you kind of showed us, which I think is a really great question for a lot.
It's a fantastic question. So the IFOPA was established in 1988. And one of the first goals that the organization did was establish fundraising as kind of the core. It was really set up as a way to help raise funds for research. And that was one of the principal funds. So a lot of the things that we're able to do, and that's why I mentioned kind of our bedrock, our foundation really comes from fundraising. I would say most of the programs that you saw today, I would say has been kind of instituted within the past 1, 3, and 5 years. So the registry we started is about 5 years old. The preclinical drug testing program, the PROs, are things we're doing this year. So some of it's new and some of it we've been working on. I'll just make one other point is you don't need to do everything at once. I know it's daunting and there's a lot that needs to be done, but get help, sit down and really prioritize. What are the things you need today versus what are the things you need tomorrow? I think taking that approach will help you begin like scaling as we talked about.
Great, thank you. So we have time for a couple more questions. This next one is for Nan. So, or I guess all of you really. Generally, what are companies like Takeda looking for in partnerships and collaborations with academic institutions? Are there criteria or best practices that will help ensure successful collaborations that you could touch on?
That is a great question. I'm going to do what I hate to do, which is punt and ask you to contact me offline. Because I'm not sure what Takeda's philosophy is. It's a little bit outside of my remit, and I've been with the company for less than a year, so my network has not quite reached into the academic collaborations team yet. But I would be more than happy to connect you if we can somehow find each other. It's nan.doyle@takeda.com.
Okay, great. Onno or Adam, from your experience, any best practices in terms of collaborating with pharma in clinical research?
Oh no.
Well, I mean, is there a bit more specific? Because it's a very broad question. I mean, pharma, yeah. I think there are just, in drug development, there are a bunch of different types of organizations involved, right? You have the patient organizations, you have the researchers, you have the clinicians, you have the regulators, and you have the pharma companies. And I think generally the crucial role for pharma companies is to like lead the process of like future fundraising when you need the big bucks, like 50 million, 100 million, $500 million, and bring the therapies to market. So I think that's where they are, where their main role probably sits nowadays, especially in the rare disease world. I think lots of early development is done like either in small startups or in smaller research labs. But I think it's really important that from the start, when you're thinking about something, when you have an idea, to think about all these different parties sitting around the table, because your idea, your treatment can get stuck anywhere in the process, right? If you make, for example, if you have a therapy that works really well, let's say it shrinks the tumors enormously, but for whatever reason even the FDA likes it and they approve it, but for whatever reason down the line, patients don't like it because maybe they're like, I don't care about what it does, or the side effects are too bad. then you cannot really sell the drug, like, and there is no viability later on. So I think that makes the situation so complex. It's an enormous development pipeline, and things can get stuck anywhere. And you kind of need to think about what you're doing today, even if it's very early in the process. You need to think about that whole trajectory. And I think involving people from different parts of the industry in different parts of that pipeline right away, and sitting around the table and discussing these things can really help you define a good strategy and prevent mistakes down the line.
I really like that answer, Onno. The only thing I would add, just thinking about this question, which is quite good, is be clear on what you bring of value back to the pharmaceutical company, because you as a patient organization representative have a lot of give as well. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I changed the title of my talk to How to Build a Great Partnership, just to convey that this is really a give and take, and you give as a patient organization. You bring that patient voice, you represent the patient community, and the more you can organize your community and the more you can bring that forward, the more value you're bringing to these researchers and drug developers. So just don't forget that you're bringing a lot to the table.
Yeah, and that's brilliant, Adam. And you know, as I heard the question, it was more, you know, the industry academic partnership, but the same holds true for everybody. You know, if you can come into something with a bit of beginner's mind and ask questions from a place of inquiry, that can go a long way, and you are bringing something. You know, there's no question about that. We can't, especially with we can't always look this up, you know, and the KOL will have a lot of ideas and a lot of good insights, but the KOL isn't the end user. So, you know, the more you can do to get out there and find those companies and be a little bit persistent, you know, that's okay too.
Great, thank you. And one final question is for Onno. Concerning your RDMD platform, could you speak a little bit more about it and how it differs from research registries? Does it also enable self-reported data from patients? And I'm curious about your sustainability plan. I imagine the cost of data integration and harmonization is pretty high.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good question. Yeah, so it's different from like when you talk about registries, what people usually mean is a contact registry primarily, and sometimes there is a questionnaire as part of the contact registry to you know, frankly, I think to be able to contact people more in a more targeted way. You can sometimes use these questionnaires for research, but in the end, it's self-reported data. And that's a problem, because sometimes you don't even know if the people in your registry are actually real patients. Like, I had a lot of people reach out to me in the beginning, like, oh, I have NF2, and I asked them about their symptoms. And I thought, no, these people don't have NF2, right? But they read something on Google, they had tinnitus, and they thought they have NF2. Right, so in the end, these registries are really important, because you need to be able to contact people if there is an important study, and then they can reach out. But if you want to enroll them in a trial, you still need to collect like real clinical records and real medical information to be able to enroll them, and not just take their word for it, right? This is really important. So what RDMD does is like the primary focus is on collecting the real clinical data, like medical records, medical history, doctor notes, MRI scans, whatever is relevant for that particular disease. And then we create de-identified structured data sets from that information that can be used for research. But it is backed up by real clinical data, and it is done in a way that is like regulatory grade, which which is a bit of a container term, but in a way that actual pharma companies can use it later on in an FDA process as well. So this is a difference between like survey-based registries and this is like a real medical record archive. Yeah, but the sustainability, yeah, so I mean, we build the platform and the technology to be able to enroll new diseases, so we don't have to build our whole platform again from scratch. So we learn every time we take on a new disease, we learn a lot and we improve it. So the next disease becomes a little bit easier, a little bit better, and the process and the team is growing and the operational part. Yeah, it does take a lot of resources. So yeah, sometimes there are companies already involved very early on, sometimes not. Yeah, we believe it's possible to make it sustainable. We just actually closed a big funding round, which is also you know, a testament that other people believe in this too. And yeah, but it's again, yeah, it's not, it requires an effort, right, in the long term, and we really do need involvement of the patient population and the patient organization. So this is what we seek with any disease we take on.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for our speakers and to our audience and to the great questions that we had. Next up, we have our rare round session. So for anybody who wants to participate, go to the auditorium and click on the center logo. Once the agenda pops up, scroll down to the rare round session and click join. A separate window will open with a list of the round table topics. Click on the topic that you'd like to attend and you'll be asked to register. Registration just includes entering your name and email address and then clicking the register button. So you will be able to join. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.